Okay, well, yeah, I think we can just get started. So, well, this is the Sport and Physique Science Club meeting, and today we have Lauren joining us. She's gonna just talk about, her background in sports nutrition. And yeah, so I guess go ahead, take it away. Do you have a presentation to share as well?
I do. I have a few slides, so let me see. Oh yeah, and it's
It
up.
should
So let me
be
share that real quick.
okay.
Sorry, I've got two screens going, and they're being a little crazy.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, is that working?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So, like you mentioned, my name is Lauren Link. I'm the director of sports nutrition for Purdue University, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana. Sometimes people don't know on the West Coast. So with that said, I actually just stole a few of these slides from a different presentation I did like a few weeks ago for a local dietetic association, but gave it this title, actually a valid career path for RDs. When I was in school, it really was not necessarily, it didn't feel that way all the time. There were just not a lot of opportunities, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So, and I have to figure out how to work my slides. Okay, we're good. So just a little bit about myself. I played soccer here at Purdue, actually, from 2007 to 2011. Geez. Sorry, my slides are crazy. I did my bachelor's in dietetics and nutrition, fitness, and health. So I had a double major in those two areas, which kind of, not exactly sports nutrition, but definitely kind of brought the two together. And then I later did my master's at Purdue as well in health and kinesiology. So it was still, bringing the sports side of things into my dietetics practice. And I first worked clinically, actually, in a hospital or a few hospitals as a floating dietitian with St. Vincent Health. And so I did that for about a year. And that was actually a really cool way in that floating role to get a lot of experience really quickly. So I worked at one big hospital as part of a team of dietitians, and we had, the whole gambit. We had an ICU, we had a NICU, we had an oncology unit, you name it. And then I also worked at a few small hospitals, like where I was the only dietitian covering, 25 beds. So I got a lot of different experience really quickly, which was cool. And then in 2014, I came back to Purdue and actually first worked for about 6 months in a part-time temporary role with Purdue Athletics. They had at that time 2 part-time dietitians, one of whom left. So I took over that part-time role. And then about 6 months later, transitioned it into what was our first at the time full-time sports dietitian role. I'm currently, like I mentioned, the director of sports nutrition. So I've been here about 8 years, just under. This picture is from Purdue versus Michigan State a month or two ago. I know probably don't follow Big Ten football, but if you did, we beat them. They were ranked number 2 or 3 at the time. So that was the field story. That was a fun moment. So I work specifically with football, men's basketball, volleyball, and soccer. I also am passionate about the life after sport component and how athletes transition when they're done being an athlete. And so in 2017, I published my first book, The Healthy Former Athlete. And personally married to my husband, Logan. We just had our first child, our daughter, Lola, about 4 months ago. So I'm a new mom. I also have a cat, Bruno, but he didn't make the slideshow. So I figured I could kind of just quickly walk through the history of sports nutrition. This is like not super in depth by any means, but just to kind of show you like how recent it really is. And a few of these examples, so I'm going to talk about Purdue because that's obviously where I have practiced mostly, but then I'm also going to pan out kind of larger scale. So in 1997, that was the first time that Purdue Athletics had a dietitian involved. And that person was 25%. So they spent about 10 hours a week doing registered dietitian things with the athletic department. And you can imagine when you have 550 athletes, that's not a lot of time, right, to devote to everything going on. But it was a start. And that went on for almost 10 years where we just had this like 25% person. So pan out, the blue text is going to be us panning out. So if we look at, again, I'm going to talk collegiate sports nutrition largely. In 2003, about 20 years ago, there were only 5 full-time sports dietitians at the Division I level. So there were only 5 people in the entire country doing what I'm doing right now, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because it was not that long ago. In 2006, I didn't really mention this, but I'm a registered dietitian, of course, and then I'm also a board certified specialist in sports dietetics, which is that CSSD credential. And that credential is actually pretty new. So that was only, made in 2006, so less than 20 years ago. And I think it's pretty cool that we have that board certification. The CDR, the body that recognizes these specialty areas, there's only 7 specialty areas of dietetics. I'm gonna forget some, but things like oncology, renal, oh gosh, there's 7 of them, and I knew I would space on them, but sports dietetics is one of them, which I think is pretty cool. So then cut back to Purdue in 2008 is when we first upped that 25% person to 50%. So still not a lot of hours, right? But a little bit bigger with nutrition, or a little bit bigger investment in sports nutrition. So that person now had 20 hours a week, and the rest of the time they were splitting with our nutrition science department. And that went on for 4 more years in 2012. And keep in mind, like the entire time I was an athlete here, that's what I had access to, right? Was that like 50% person. So we saw the sports dietitian a little bit, but like only really if you had something going on, like something big going on. So in 2012, they added the second 50-50 split. So they said, okay, we're going to have 2 part-time people, and they'll each spend some time with the athletic department and some time teaching. So then again, pan out in 2014, something called deregulation happened. And I'm not going to get into what that all entailed, but essentially in a nutshell, that was a change in the NCAA rules that allowed schools to do a lot more with nutrition. So it used to have like a lot of restrictions, and you couldn't really provide that much in terms of food. And this rule change in 2014 like did away with a lot of that. So that's part of what fueled the big spike that we're going to talk about. So 2014, now there are 58 full-time sports dietitians at the Division I level. So that's a big jump, right? I mean, it's still not that many people overall, but that's like 10 times as many as there were about 10 years prior. So back to Purdue, added our first full-time dietitian. That was myself. So then we had myself and one of those part-time people. Not too long after that, we added a second full-time dietitian. So we replaced the part-time position with another full-time. So now we had 2 dietitians. Cut back to the whole country. A couple years later, we're now over 100 full-time dietitians in 2016. In 2017, we added our 3rd full-time here at Purdue. Most recently, like earlier this year, we added our 4th full-time dietitian here. And so now when you look at the landscape of sports nutrition, again, just in the collegiate level, there's plenty of other areas, and I'll talk about that, but we have over 200 full-time dietitians practicing at the Division I level in athletics. So I think that's really cool. And again, if you think back to that 2003 bullet where I told you there were 5 full-time dietitians in the whole country, I just told you, right, that we have 4 here at Purdue. Like I'm one of 4 here. So I think that's pretty cool, and just telling like how much we've grown. Sports nutrition has really kind of exploded over the last 10, 15 years. So where does the sports dietitian practice? Obviously collegiate athletics is what I know and what I do. Definitely the bulk of those, 200 plus people are going to be in the Power 5 conferences. And the Power 5 refers to the Big 10, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, and the Pac-12. So, they just have more money, they have more resources. So that's definitely where a lot of those positions lie, but not all. We're definitely seeing it trickle down. The Ivy League schools, most of them have a full-timer at this point. You're starting to see smaller D1, and even some D2 and D3 schools have sports dietitians working with those programs. So it's pretty cool. Professional athletics, probably not surprisingly, There's a definite need for sports dietitians in the professional setting. I think a lot of people would probably assume that it like kind of trickled down into collegiate athletics, but it actually trickled up. So professional athletics has been a bit behind the collegiate setting. And I really think it has to do with, you've had now athletes or whole classes of athletes come into the pros after having a dietitian all 4 or 5 years they were here and saying, why is there not a dietitian? Like, why don't I have that resource? So they've started to add them. So now in the NFL, I think I'm accurate in saying just about every team, if not every team, has a full-time dietitian. A couple even have 2. The NBA, it's starting to be a little bit more common. Definitely not all have them yet, but getting closer. The MLB actually wrote into their player agreement that they had to have access to a dietitian. So that really exploded in the MLB and the minor leagues too. NHL, I should have put MLS up here. Like they're both starting to see a little bit more. So it's definitely exploding. UFC is another example. UFC actually has now whole training facilities dedicated to performance for their athletes. And that includes the one in Las Vegas. I think there are 4 or 5 dietitians on staff there. So pretty cool. Definitely professional athletics is an area. Military, I think people are sometimes surprised, but military, we call them tactical athletes. And if you think about what we're asking them to do, especially our special forces, it makes sense, right? I mean, they really are like athletic kind of populations. So you're going to see more jobs in like the special forces, like your Army Rangers, your Navy SEALs, but also with other military settings, not just the special forces. Sports performance institutes, things like St. Vincent Sports Performance, Memorial Hermann Ironman are starting to have positions. Some high school athletics, believe it or not, are starting to have at least somebody consulting with them. I only know of one full-time dietitian that's in a high school setting, but there's definitely not a ton. And then even these like casual exercise environments, right? Lifetime Fitness is hiring dietitians, and they're just one example, but gyms, organizations like that are starting to hire dietitians, not necessarily working with elite athletes, but working with, exercising people, and maybe your weekend warriors, people running marathons or doing Ironman competition, things like that. Corporate wellness, not as big of an example, but certainly could fit in, things like companies too, like Gatorade hires dietitians, and that's just one example. So there's lots of opportunity in sports nutrition. Okay, so wanted to talk about what we do, which is honestly like so many things. So we do a lot of individual athlete consultations. So just like you would in almost every setting, at least that I can think of with being a dietitian, you're going to have a lot of one-on-one consults or counseling sessions, right? So we do the same thing, and I'll talk in another minute about what we would talk about. We do provide medical nutrition therapy. So, I think people sometimes assume like, oh, well, you're working with college kids, like what would be wrong with them, right? Like what medical needs would they have? And actually there's a lot. I don't have any examples, but off the top of my head, we always, while I've been here, have had at least one diabetic athlete. Sometimes we have 2 or 3. We have lots of GI issues. We see Crohn's, we see ulcerative colitis, we see IBS. We have lots of food allergies. Again, right now, off the top of my head, we have 2 athletes here with celiac disease, lots of severe nut allergies, eating disorders, unfortunately. So, I mean, we have a lot of medical nutrition therapy that actually plays into our role. We do body composition testing and bone mineral density testing. We have a DEXA machine, if you're familiar with that. It's a body composition method. So we do scans on all of our athletes about 3 times a year. We do some team education, and that could be, really formal, like have them in a classroom with a PowerPoint. More often, it's like grabbing the team quickly when they finish a lift or at the end of practice or something like that. And sometimes, I don't know if I have it on here or not, but sometimes team education would include fun things like food demos or grocery store tours, things like that. A lot of nutrition supplementation. So, we're not just passing out supplements right and left, but if we, we test for vitamin D, so we would supplement that if needed. We test for iron levels, we would supplement that. So that's a couple examples of what we might do there. anything that our athletes are taking, so not just stuff that we're providing, but anything they're taking that's a supplement, we would be screening that and kind of approving or more likely disapproving of it. We manage our fueling station areas, and I should have thrown a picture on here of those areas, but kind of imagine like a really fancy snack bar or something. We have multiple fueling stations that we oversee. So, you know, as dietetic students, I think people are always like, I hate food service. Like I never want to do food service. And I wouldn't have necessarily thought that I'd be doing food service, but here I am. It's definitely a part of my job, managing these fueling station areas. Got out of order. We do menu planning, a lot of menu planning. We have an athletic dining room. So again, talk about food service. I mean, we work every day with our chef there, with our food service managers, doing the menus, making sure that that is, you know, what we want in that space. We manage the budgets for all this stuff above. And so I will tell you, I manage about a $1.4 million budget, and I oversee another 1.2-ish in meals. So I have direct oversight, you know, of a 7-figure budget, and I have my hands in or involved with about $2.5 million. And if you would have told me that in college, I would have been like, what? Like how? No, it just wasn't even in my mind. So I think it's a good reminder that a lot of the different skills that you might not think you would end up using, you could. We do a lot of team travel. So whether it's little things like snack bags, menu coordination with a restaurant on the road to make sure our allergies are set, you name it. We do a lot of travel coordination. We assist in recruiting. Again, probably something you don't really think about, but we, you know, everything I'm telling you guys right now, we talk to future athletes or, you know, hopeful recruits that we want to get as a team, and talk to their parents and kind of sell them on what Purdue has to offer. Oh, and there you go. I mentioned this earlier, food demos, grocery store tours, dining hall tours, things like that. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. People often ask, like, what's a normal day like? And the answer is, it totally depends. Everything I just said, you know, sometimes depending on the season that we're in or what's going on. I mean, sometimes I might have mostly athlete consultations like all day long. And other days I might not see an athlete in my office, and I might just be running around at practice, or I might be making smoothies for a team you know, before practice ends. I mean, you name it, it's all over the place. So, and I like that aspect, that no day is really the same. Again, I mentioned, you know, we do spend a lot of time consulting with athletes. So what would that be about? Anything nutrition, honestly. So weight gain or weight loss, or just trying to like change their body composition, is definitely something that we talk about. I think people usually assume like that's the main thing we talk about. And it's definitely not. That is a topic, but we also, you know, we spend a lot of time just talking about like, how can we improve their diet? Performance goals, right? How can they use nutrition to enhance their performance? A lot of hydration, or helping athletes not cramp. I mentioned those altered lab values. So if they have low vitamin D or low iron, hemoglobin, hematocrit, we would chat about that. Amenorrhea or oligomenorrhea, so a change to a female athlete's period, that is a sign of not getting enough calories usually. So that is something that we would talk about if we see a change in their period. A lot of GI stuff, I mentioned that. Disordered eating disorders, or red S. I threw this on I think another slide too. But just to kind of point out, like, we're working with big dudes sometimes. So that's one of my basketball players' shoes. But anyway, I'll come back to that in a sec. Okay, so to kind of wrap up, before we open up for questions, I just wanted to hit a few myths that I hear a lot from people. So one is, you know, elite athletes follow a strict meal plan. Everyone's like, oh, are you like writing meal plans all day? And like, I'll write a meal plan here and there. But the truth is, you know, yeah, some do. I would say a few. But honestly, at the end of the day, a lot of them struggle with the same thing that you guys might, or that, you know, Joe Schmo on the street might. Meal plans are hard to follow. And these kids are college athletes, right? They're going to class, they're running around, they're traveling, they're busy. A meal plan can be really hard to actually carry out. And some, you know, that bottom part, some people have the like, well, I'm an athlete, so I can eat whatever I want. We get a lot of freshmen with that attitude because they've always been the best at what they're doing. They've just never really had to worry about it. So, that's kind of the struggle that we see. And like I said, I don't mind writing an athlete a meal plan if I think they'll actually follow it or if I think it's appropriate, but it's a small percentage that want them and that actually use them. Another myth, elite athletes' calorie needs aren't that much higher than a casual athlete. And actually, this is not only a myth outside of these walls, but inside too. Our athletes are constantly underestimating the calories that they need. So the truth is, athletes work out a lot. For our college athletes, I would say most of the time, here and there, they'll have an off week or something, but most of the time they're working out at least 2 hours a day, sometimes up to 4 or 5 hours a day. By the time you consider practice for a couple hours, conditioning or a lift, just getting, ball work in, skill work. It's a lot. So it requires an immense number of calories. And just to kind of quantify that for you, we know the RDA is 2,000 calories, which, isn't appropriate for lots of non-athletes, even depending on your activity level, your body size, whatever. But then if we think about the activity factors, right? And this is just a really general way to guesstimate. Most of my athletes kind of live in this heavy exercise or very heavy exercise, right? They're working out at least every day, if not twice a day. And so that activity factor, we're going to times by 1.7, 1.9, sometimes even like really intense periods, we might times their needs by like 2.2. So it's high. And just a few examples, this is a female diver, 5'4", 115 pounds. So really like on the very small side for an athlete, just trying to maintain her weight. I would probably recommend about 2,800 calories. That's for a small athlete in a low calorically or caloric needing sport, trying to maintain weight. So that sometimes shocks, especially our female athletes, because they hear the same stuff that y'all do, right? Oh, 1,200 calories, 1,500 calories. And I'm like, no, even if you weren't an athlete, you need more than that. So another example, female soccer player, 5'7", 145 pounds, trying to maintain her weight, probably needs about 3,600 calories. That's a perfect example of like the athletes are like, I need what? It's hard for them to believe it sometimes because they hear the opposite in the media. A couple of, extreme examples, male basketball player, 7'2", 295. My entire time here at Purdue, we've had an athlete who's at least 7'2". On our basketball team right now, we have one that's 7'4". Just trying to maintain his weight, I would recommend about 5,500 calories. That athlete's resting metabolic rate, like if he didn't move all day, he would need like 3,000 calories. So it's a massive amount of calories, right? To fuel somebody that size. Similarly, a male football player, 6'4", 310 pounds, trying to gain weight. I'm going to tell him he needs at least 6,000 calories, probably sometimes even closer to 7,000 calories. So hopefully this kind of helps quantify. It's a lot. And especially for those, last couple examples, it can be exhausting almost, like they just feel like they're eating all the time, right? So it's like hard for some of us to understand sometimes. And you're like, how can you not gain weight? Like I could gain weight tomorrow if I needed. It can actually be a real task for athletes when they're trying to consume this much food. There, the other picture, I knew I threw it somewhere. So that's the 7'2" guy. Okay, a couple more. Elite athletes need supplements to promote optimal performance. The truth is, obviously if they have a deficiency, yeah, we need to supplement that, but athletes actually don't need additional supplementation. Generally that higher micronutrient need that they might have is met by eating more food, right? I just told you they need a lot more calories. Generally they're going to get what they need by just eating more food, like to get their calorie needs met. So the exception would be, if they have a totally crap diet and they're not getting a lot of variety, or they don't eat very many fruits or veggies, or things like that, they eat a lot of processed foods, they might need some supplementation, a multivitamin or something like that. But supplement companies would love for them to believe that they need all this stuff, branched chain amino acids and B vitamins and you name it, because they're an athlete. And that's really not the case. If they're eating a decent diet, they're probably covering most or all of their needs. I think this is the last one. College athletes are not that into fad diet trends or silly supplements. I wish. It's usually equally, and they're equally enamored by fad diets and just dumb products as the general public. Not surprising, probably, right? But just like you guys likely do, they spend a lot of time on social media. They see a lot of misinformation there. So yeah, it's kind of surprising. Sometimes I see my athletes come to me with, these weight loss diets or weight loss supplements or stuff that I would expect like a 50-year-old woman to be wanting to do. And my football player is showing it to me. So they definitely are prone to that. And I don't know how closely you guys follow collegiate athletics, but NIL or name, image, and likeness is a big deal right now. Finally allowing college athletes to profit off of their name, image, and likeness. And that change has actually been very interesting to see the supplement companies like latch onto that. So that'll be a kind of frustrating thing to manage as we go forward. But anyway, I think that's what I had. I'm happy to take questions. If you're interested in sports nutrition, my email is right there. It's just my name. I am pretty inundated with email right now, but if you have something, follow-up question, I will get to it eventually. I promise. Instagram or Twitter, Link to Nutrition, and Boiler Fuel is our Purdue one if you're interested in this topic. And I will stop sharing. If we do have questions, let's see.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask? Okay. So I wanted to ask, why are so many athletes so into taking creatine? What is the pros and the cons of it? Do you suggest that? That's my first question. Then I had another one.
Yeah. So creatine is totally, it is researched. It is a legitimate supplement if it makes sense for the situation. So there's a few situations that make sense for, and you want to be taking a good one, right? So like disclaimer with any supplement, there are crap versions of any supplement. But if you take a good one, creatine can be helpful for weight gain because it can, in about 2/3 of people are like responders to creatine. In those folks, it can help put on muscle mass if you're doing a muscle building program in the weight room. And I won't get into the weeds with why, but so that's one reason is it can help with, building muscle mass. And that sometimes makes women like afraid of creatine because they don't want to like hulk up. And actually that, it's not just going to automatically make you hulk up or anything. So that's one reason. Another good reason to take it would be you're in an explosive sport. So something, not an endurance-based sport, but an explosive sport that really like, I'm thinking like a thrower, right? So like the one motion or a jumper, a sprinter, things like that, like really short bouts of wrestling or something. Creatine is our first fuel source. So it kind of goes, creatine fuels, if I stood up and started, I don't know, jumping right now in place, creatine would fuel the first few seconds of that activity. Then we move into carbohydrate. Carbohydrate fuels a huge chunk of our activity. And then if we keep working out long enough, we transition into burning fat. So with those explosive activities, creatine can be helpful for athletes like that. In theory, you're getting creatine, not in theory, you are getting creatine if you're eating animal products, like meat, for instance. So if you have a balanced diet, like you don't necessarily need it, but it could help for those. And then the last thing is in concussion research, post-concussion, creatine has been shown to be helpful for recovery. So that was a little bit long-winded, but that, yes, it can be good if you're taking a good brand. I recommend something that's 100% creatine monohydrate. It's the most researched form of creatine, and in those situations, it can be helpful.
So would you not suggest alkaline creatine or crealkaline creatine? You would over mono or?
So my knowledge, like there's the brand crealkaline, and I don't know if that's what you're referencing. If there is an alkaline form of creatine, I've mainly seen research on creatine monohydrate and creatine hydro something. It's escaping me a little bit at the moment. There may be some like alkali form of creatine, but crealkaline, the brand or the like trademarked kind of creatine, that's not necessarily the form of creatine that they use. So I would look at the ingredient list, like the supplement facts label, and that should tell you what form of creatine it is. But if there's a new one out there, it's not been probably researched enough for me to say, yeah, definitely use that.
I think it's a hybrid one. It said like mono and then alkaline. So that's why I was like, I didn't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I've truthfully not heard of that.
Okay.
But again, my first inclination would be it must be pretty new. Whereas monohydrate, like again, 100% monohydrate is the most research that I would feel confident saying like, yeah, use that.
So 100% monohydrate. Okay.
Mhm.
And then I was gonna ask one more question if it's okay. How do you suggest athletes eat so much and get all those calorie requirements all day long? Do they meal prep for that, or how do they consume that much throughout the day?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, for sure, like eating frequently, right? So they can't really afford to like skip a meal or something. And they do sometimes. They're like, oh, I got busy and I forgot to eat lunch. And it's like, that's a huge chunk of calories we just lost. So definitely eating frequently helps. Snacking a lot helps. But on top of that, we talk a lot about like caloric density. So, you know, we of course want our athletes to eat healthy and, you know, eat lots of fruits and vegetables and lean proteins and what have you, and whole grains. But if you were to eat 6,000 calories of lean protein, fruits and veggies, and whole grains, you would like explode probably, right? Like it would just be like, so we have to get creative, or we have to get strategic is actually the better word. So, you know, healthy fats, best friend. So we're like, you like peanut butter, you like nuts, trail mix, like load up. You know, avocado, olive oil, if they're cooking, like salad dressing. We talk a lot about condiments, right? Like usually your dietitian's not like, yay, mayo and ranch dressing. But in this case, I'm like, by all means, like use some condiments, like load that sucker up, because it's an easy way to add calories without adding a ton more food. You know, throw extra cheese slices on your sandwich, put mayo on it, like those kinds of things. And then the other big one is beverages. So again, love my athletes to drink lots of water, be hydrated. And I'm not telling them like, yeah, go, you know, drink Coke all day long. But I'll say like, let's make a good, I usually say like at least 3 drinks a day. Let's have chocolate milk, 100% fruit juice or smoothie, protein shake, like something like that that's calorically dense, because it adds up a lot quicker without them feeling so full. So again, if they were to do, you know, I always give the example, if you did 3 glasses a day, so like breakfast, lunch, dinner, you can still have water by all means. But if you 3 times a day grab a glass of chocolate milk, a glass of juice, a smoothie, whatever, that's probably like 300 calories, give or take, each time you do that. That's almost 1,000 calories that we added just like that, right? Just from drinks. So those are a few strategies off the top of my head that we will talk a lot about with weight gain.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably email you because I have more, but I don't want to take up time. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I had a
then
question as
Bonnie.
well, if I can jump in.
Yeah. Maybe we could do Bonnie first. She raised her hand.
So I've been teaching ballet for many years. Some of my students dance probably 14 hours a week. And in ballet, they're more prone to eating disorders as well, just because they're really focused on, you know, the thin physique.
For sure.
And being that I'm not, I mean, I probably will look into the certification at some point in the future, but being that I am already in that teaching position, but not an RD yet, what would be your suggestion on the best way I can support them currently?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's tricky. I mean, you're right. It's that sport is prone for sure, like many similar sports, to eating disorders or disordered eating. I would say, and I don't know exactly, without getting into the weeds, you know, it depends a little bit on your role, like what the environment is like there and things. But what I was gonna get at was, I think anything you can do to like create a nice culture around it, and that can be easier said than done, especially depending on how much involvement you have with various things. But I think that can help, like that's an appropriate thing for you to do as a coach, like try to create a good culture around that kind of stuff. If there's, you know, disordered talk going on, like kind of squash it. You know, like again, I don't know if snacks are available or things like that. I know in the gymnastics culture, that's like a big one, is it's like very looked down upon to snack while you're, you know, working out, and like whatever. So like having snacks available and making that like, yeah, absolutely. Like we should fuel up. Maybe you as the coach, like, hey, is everybody hydrated? You know, have we fueled up before we are starting? Like everyone's eating a snack, like maybe some of those little nuances could help. Just again, kind of like creating the culture, setting the tone that like, this is what's expected and like, this is what will help you. That's one thought. And then, I mean, if you do see concerning stuff, I mean, I think the best course of action is always just to like refer, which can be hard depending on what kind of resources you have available. But if you can get them in to talk to somebody, it just is so much better and goes so much better from an outcome standpoint if they can talk to at least one of the following, which would be a dietitian, a physician who works with eating disorders, and a therapist, right, or a psychologist. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to meet with all of them, but like one would be a huge start. And if you can make a referral somehow, whether it's, I don't know, talking to their parents, again, I don't know the age group, talking to the parents, talking to that athlete, and just like trying to make that happen. Those are a few thoughts off the top of my head. I don't know how realistic they are, but that it's tricky for sure. It puts you guys as coaches in that situation in a hard spot.
Yeah, I mean, where I can give general nutrition information, and they appreciate that role, but I just didn't want to get too, well, I don't get one-on-one with anybody. I don't do any of that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have a good approach in that sense. And I think any like positive reinforcement you can do with some of the general nutrition information is a plus.
Okay, thank you so much.
And then we have Diana.
Yeah, so I was wondering, this is more on the career side. So currently the avenues of dietetics, they take you the internship, you kind of get pushed into this clinical route, like hospitals, elderly care settings, things like that. So it's a bit discouraging if you don't want to end up in those areas of dietetics. So what would be your recommendation in terms of branching out to, you know, whether sports nutrition, because obviously that's your expertise, or any others for that matter?
Sure. So I think I have two-parter. So one, I would just say, for what it's worth, like I felt the same way. I knew I didn't really want to do clinical. I actually liked it more than I thought I would, like while I was doing it, but it definitely was not something that I saw myself doing long-term. But I would say, like, for what it's worth, it's obviously like the vast majority of dietetics jobs, right? Like if you pan out like the entire scope. So I always tell people, like, I personally at least wouldn't want to like pigeonhole myself too early into like one specialty, even though like sports nutrition, like I just said, is way more available now than it was. But I think there's still value in like getting some experience, I guess, is where I'm going with that. And there's a lot of things that I learned when I was clinical for that year and in my dietetic internship that I still use today, right? You know, we still chart, we still look at lab values, we still see these medical conditions. So I think there's like a positive, a silver lining, if you will, if you do some of that. But then to your other point, like definitely, I think what I would do if you start to identify an area, a specialty area, if you will, I would suggest, like, as you're looking at dietetic internship programs, look for ones that have either, you know, like there are sports nutrition DIs out there, or at least ones that let you spend a good chunk of time with a sports nutrition program. So that I think is like something that you could do, is look for programs that have that, or if nothing else, look for programs that have some flexibility with the engagement rotation. That's what mine was called, at least an engagement rotation. I think everybody has, though, that one kind of like flux one where you can pick an area of interest, and make sure you go, you know, again, sports nutrition is a good example. If I were doing that, I might think about like, where could I go geographically? And it has to make sense financially, et cetera too, but where could I go geographically where I would have an opportunity to do that? You know, like if you went to kind of podunk town or small city that didn't have a lot of sports teams around it, you're probably not going to find a great opportunity to work with a sports team as part of that engagement rotation, right? But if you went and did it in, I don't know, Dallas or something, you've got a number of small colleges, big colleges, not that far away, professional teams, club and high school, like elite level club and high school teams that would be like, yeah, we'd love help with that potentially. So those are my main thoughts. Would be like kind of set yourself up for success with the dietetic internship program that you choose or that you're like applying to. And then again, like whatever specialty you're interested in, like consider joining. I always tell people like join as a student with organizations because it's cheaper. So take advantage of the cheap student prices. So I'm biased because I'm on the board of directors, but the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association is, like, in my opinion, by far the most applicable group if you're interested in sports nutrition. So that's CPSDA or sportsrd.org. If you're interested, like joining programs or organizations like that for that student member price can be great because you start to kind of make connections. You know, maybe you're able to go to an event that's nearby and like start networking. At least in athletics, like networking is huge. So those are my main thoughts, is kind of like a few steps you could do to maybe set yourself up for success, despite being maybe pushed towards a clinical route. But also there's a positive with the clinical stuff. You may use it sometime.
Thank you so much. That was great info.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and we had one question in the chat earlier. Somebody's asking, is sugar and fats not a concern? I think that was in the context of the
higher
calorie, yeah. The higher
Yeah,
calorie.
so I mean, that's a fair question. Obviously, like I said, I mean, I mentioned like healthy fats, right? So I'm not telling them to go get 1,000 extra calories a day from soda, or 1,000 extra calories a day from mayo or bacon or something. Those might be in their diet here and there, but of course I don't want them to be like super prevalent. But I would also say it's not like a hyper focus. I think for one, probably a lot of practitioners it felt definitely this way in school. We do get kind of hyper focused on that stuff, and we have to kind of pan out, in my opinion, on the bigger picture sometimes, right? And so, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm working with 18 to 22-year-olds who work out 2 to 4 hours a day. So no, I'm not especially worried, right, about them getting some extra sugar or extra fat here and there. They're college students. They're going to drink on Friday. They're going to have a candy bar. They're going to, they're going to have pizza. So I don't lose like a ton of sleep about that, but it's fair to say, like, definitely we want to create good habits, right? Because they're not going to be 20 years old forever. So at some point the extra sugar and fat, would be a bigger concern. So I think it's just a balance, trying to find that balance for them and helping them understand, like, how do we use these kinds of things or this approach as a tool for what we're doing in sport, but like that it's a tool to get there. And we might have to change that tool with different scenarios, right? Like, we're not always going to be trying to do this. So that's where the team education, the life skills, right? The cooking demos, the grocery store tours, like that kind of stuff comes into account. Because definitely, like, for my population, we're trying to lay foundational knowledge too. So I hope that kind of answered it. In short, the answer would be no for my population, not a huge concern.
All right, and then I guess we can go to Ariana.
Hi, I was more, my question, I guess, is more like client or patient centered. As a sports nutrition dietitian, how would you say your client interaction is different than like in a clinical setting? Like, I feel like you get more like a better relationship. And then how often do you consult with athletes?
Yeah, great question. So you're right. And clinical setting can mean a lot of different things. So some RDs might say like, no, I have great relationships with my patients, or, if they're seeing them long-term. In my clinical experience, it was very much like, okay, I have this diabetic consult, so I'm going to go talk to the person that doesn't want to talk to me about their diabetes, or I'm going to go talk to this heart patient about their, congestive heart failure that they're here for the 4th time about. So definitely like the clinical setting, it was hard in that way. Like it's not a super motivated population usually, unless they've had a big, health event and they're like, okay, I'm ready to make a change. But not super motivated, usually not healthy, right? Obviously, if we're seeing them. Whereas I work with a healthy, young, mostly motivated, not always, but mostly motivated population. So yeah, I like that aspect. It just depends on, what people like. And I do get to see the reason I love, for instance, collegiate athletics. I've actually had a couple professional athletics opportunities over the years, and here I am still in collegiate. And part of the reason for that is I love this age group. I love that I do get to see them for 4 or 5 years. I love that I get to like kind of watch them become an adult and learn some of those life skills. Like that's really fulfilling to me. So I love that relationship part. But it also kind of depends on your staffing model, right? So I work with 4 teams now. So I have a lot more time to see my athletes, and it depends on the athlete. I mean, I have athletes that I see practically every week. Depending on the team, I mean, like football, we're at every practice, like we staff practice, like those guys I have a pretty good relationship with, and most of my teams I have a pretty good relationship with. But you also have athletes that like, they just don't ever want a lot of help or need a lot of help. And maybe I don't see them very often. Maybe I see them once or twice a year, like in my, so yeah, there's a spectrum, but definitely I would agree with your kind of assessment, that there's a better ability to build relationships, higher motivated, things like that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right, and we can go to Adrian.
Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was a really interesting presentation, and I really enjoyed it. Do you you said you work with the men's basketball team, right?
I do.
Okay, I know Jared Wilburn. He went to my high school.
Oh,
If
nice.
you could, let him know I say hello. That would be great.
Deal. He was in my office earlier today, actually. So
Right.
I'll totally give you a plug.
Yeah, Adrian. He'll know who I am.
Got it.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. Bye.
All right, and we have another question in the chat. This one is pretty long. Priscilla, do you want to?
Yeah. Hi, Lauren. Oh, can you hear me? Oh,
Yeah, you're good.
Oh. So I had a really long question. I wrote it in the chat before I forgot. So I know you mentioned that actually with all these questions that came up, it kind of supports like what I was thinking. You mentioned that you knew one dietitian that had a full-time position in high school. Is it like sports related too? So I was curious to know, you see and you hear so often you can be like a dietitian, like for early Head Start programs or Head Start programs. So it kind of seems like to start, we kind of give them the support, but then once we reach like school age or middle school and in high school, where we start going through this like major transition, we no longer, or like students no longer have the support of a registered dietitian, unless I've never, at least when I was in high school, we didn't have that. I know you mentioned right now, one full time. So I was wondering if you understand the reason for that, and I was kind of thinking as all these questions came up that we get older and like we still don't, we're playing sports, we're doing all kinds of things without the proper support in nutrition that we need. So my main question after that is, like, what do you recommend for us going into dietetics to make those decisions happen, to be able to be the, like I said, I know you can do that in early Head Start and Head Start programs, but how can we make that happen for like high schoolers where there's that major transition to puberty that can then lead us to like college and being able to make the choices that we've been that we would be taught had we had that support in high school. what do you think about that? And like, what do you recommend for us going into it?
Yeah, I'll give you my best guess because I've not worked in high school, obviously, and it's kind of a whole separate it's a whole separate setting, right? With like different challenges, I'm sure, in terms of support for positions like this. But honestly, my guess as to why there's not so many is just budget. If I'm being honest, that usually it's money for anything in terms of, you know, why is there not staff for this or that? So I think, I guess I hope that we'll see some trickle down, right? That as this kind of continues to gain popularity just in general, that corporations might put money towards that. I think probably again, this is just my opinion, so I don't have a factual statement here, but I think probably if someone were trying to like seek out positions for a high school setting, I would start with like maybe a corporation level. That might be more realistic, right? Like maybe you serve X number of schools and that's maybe more affordable. Usually like how we grow positions is you have to show a need first, right? So you have to say like, we need this for XYZ, and you get a little bit, right? We got that 25% and then we get the 50%. And it grows and it grows and it grows. And the reason it grows is because you're showing that they need, right? And then we have coaches saying, hey, we need a dietitian, or hey, we need them to do this. We need them to travel with us. We need all these things. And so that's how it grows there. So I would think the two thoughts I had were corporation level or like through like health science, right? Or like health class, like some kind of insertion there. I don't know. But I think however it looks to start, probably the goal is then to grow it, right? And go from there. The last thing I'll say is that high school has the added challenge of the athletes or the people, whether it's sports related or not, the people you're working with don't control very much of their life, right? Their life, but they're not buying the groceries. They're not making the food usually. Half of them aren't driving themselves, so it's so reliant on parents. And I know that's like a big difference for my population compared to like the folks I know who have done some stuff with high school, is that they just don't have a lot of control over what happens. So for what it's worth, that's kind of an additional consideration.
Probably what's the reason why, one reason why we should be able to have access to it, right? Because we do that with early Head Start. There's always a dietitian, or not just early Head Start, but those federally funded programs, where it's, especially for the early Head Start, they're 3 years old or 2 years old, and it's the parent that's in control. So it almost seems like we do provide that option when we're little, but then it just kind of disappears, and then you go to sports, and then luckily we have you
Yeah.
to try to help us make those corrections that we kind of missed throughout the last 10 years.
For sure.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're running out of time. We just have like a couple announcements, but thank you, Lauren, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing everything.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, let me share my screen. So I guess you guys can leave your leave your email in the chat, just to get on the list, to make sure we get our emails out to you guys. Also, so we can send you the link to the video recording. But yeah, we have a e-board position available. We're still looking for a scheduler to help with the meeting planning and like booking rooms if we come to that next semester with things moving more in person. So if you're interested in that, you can email me at this email, and I'll put it in the chat. But yeah, also you can leave your email in the chat to get on the list, and we'll collect it. And also wanted to tell you guys about this a coaching opportunity at San Antonio Regional Hospital. And so basically it's just a volunteer or internship coaching program where you get direct experience coaching patients. And so the deadline for the application for the next term is the December 17th. And so I can send out the flyer to that to our email list. So yeah, leave your email in the chat if you want to see that too. But yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you guys all for coming. Yeah, we'll end there. Oh yeah, I'll put my email in the chat too.
Thank you.